this podcast, Brian Haugli, Chief Security Officer at the Hanover Insurance Group, talks about his journey as a Chief Security Officer and some of the best practices. So stay tuned. So welcome everyone to another episode of Future of Data podcast. Today we have with us Brian Haugli, who is who's a certified information security, system security professional and global industrial cybersecurity professional, and currently working as Chief Security Officer at the Hanover Insurance Group. Brian previously served as a senior advisor on cybersecurity and information risk management for Department of Defense, U.S. Army, and Pentagon. He has 15 years of professional experience and knowledge of and has implemented risk implementation framework, methodologies, and processes. He has been responsible for creating compliant and secure network for multiple sites through his extensive background in intrusion detection and full network end-to-end testing. He has outstanding communications and a positive demeanor and ability to interface with all level of organization. So Brian, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to our community about your experience and your journey.
Thanks, Vishal. Thanks for having me.
Beautiful. So, by the way, impressive profile. So let's talk about whatever you can share your journey to this point. If you can share us what got you into security and then how you sort of went to this point, that will be really helpful.
Sure. So I actually started kind of working with computers at a young age, and it was kind of more of a hobby than anything. I was pretty much on track to go down the road and go to college to be I really wanted to be a history teacher. And after high school, I started working in the space, and it, prior to really going to college, and then so I kind of caught that bug from that perspective. And then from there, I enrolled in a college degree that was based around network administration. So, routers, switches, core networking, and that really let me kind of hone my skills and get kind of the theoretical component of all of it. After that, I graduated. I married my girlfriend from the time, and we moved down to Washington, D.C. area. So it was like a really rapid change right after graduation. And I took on a job down in the D.C. area, eventually just working into the Department of Defense and an intelligence community agency. So supporting those, doing a variety of different functional roles within IT and security for them. And then my last role, working as the information assurance program team lead for the program within the Pentagon. And that was 2 years ago. And then I actually got recruited from there to become the Chief Information Security Officer for the Hanover Insurance Group, where I'm currently am right now.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that, by the way. And now let's talk about your current role. Like so CISO or CSO, what that really means and what all that job entails.
So it's actually a recent change to becoming the CSO. I lost the I out of my title, but nice. I gained oversight for all of physical security. So now I have just overall global responsibility for just what we're just referring to as now just corporate security. So both information security as well as physical security. So yeah, my role within both those spaces, and most notably as being the CISO, was information security for the Hanover. So that requires the diligence around implementing policies and procedures within the organization to adhere to a high level standard for information security practices, implementing a number of different teams that are doing what I refer to as defensive operations. So these are the guys and the girls who are looking at what's going on the wire, taking a look at network traffic, and doing analysis on all of that data to hunt for malicious or abnormal behavior within the organization, and then working with the IT operations teams to remediate those activities or just contain and quarantine any threats that they find, as well as it's a it's kind of sometimes looked at as a non-IT function, but doing training and awareness and outreach into the organization, because the humans, the people are the largest attack surface of any organization. So treating them and empowering them to be the best first and last line of defense is a huge component of what we're trying to do. And it's interesting, when we talk about data and those groups, they're the richest source of information, and we have to pivot on how we look at how people react to certain things and use that information to help us build either better training or just better defenses. So we use and leverage a lot of data to be able to make those types of decisions and change our approaches. And I think that is what separates a lot of what we're doing here and what the program I've looked to build and have built from my peers within the industry and within, I think, the rest of just anyone who has to have, and really it is everybody who has to go through and have an information security practice. We're starting to leverage and are leveraging data analytics to make better decisions on what to defend and where to defend. In talks I've given previously, I kind of harp on this, but the days of relying on just firewalls and data sources now for us to help make decisions, they're not the end all be all, and they are not the only things we should be leveraging. So they become data sources, and we couple that with other pieces, and then from there we can make better decisions about how to either make them better or remove them and do something else.
Interesting. We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. I think that's fascinating. So one thing that I picked up from your response was, so Chief Security Officer entail CISO as well as the physical security. And actually, interestingly, I was having a conversation, I think about last month, with one of the banks, one of the large bank in US, and they were talking about how CISO will eventually, the personal security is getting more digital, and then CISO. So the idea there will be a Chief Security Officer framework, and I think you're the one. Luckily, you're suggesting the same thing. So what are some of the things that that you think that personal, how you as a CISO and physical security, how they are combining, if you can shed some light on that?
Sure. Well, the way I look at it is we're both trying to defend something, right? Within information security, you're defending and protecting data or access, right? And from a logical standpoint, physical security is the same aspect. And again, granted, I'm new to the role, and I've never previously had that underneath me. So, I will admit I'm learning that area, but I have a great team already and a great leadership within that are now reporting me that I can lean on for that. So by no means am I going to say that I'm a master within that space, but the reason that I was very eager to help oversee and help steer that is because of the similarities. Physical security is defending and protecting the same types of assets. There's just, and it's protecting and establishing rules around access, as well as access to data, as well as looking after the safety of your employee workforce. So you see a lot of overlap. It's just two different ways to tackle it, whether it's logical or physical, to protect very much the same things. What I also really like is that there are some capabilities within technologies you can leverage to have both of them really get pulled together and correlate some information. Take, for instance, badge access information into a building along with VPN access into your network. If I saw somebody and I'm able to correlate that information and say, hey, Bob just walked into the building, but I can also see in that next half an hour that he's VPN'd in from someplace in Texas. He doesn't work out of Texas. He works out of this office. That should raise a flag and then, launch some type of an investigation. So you can pull that type of kind of basic example, but that type of information together through two different historically disparate teams to come up with, an incident or an event that you need to actually investigate that has some, something behind it.
Interesting. We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai .tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. So as per you, a typical legacy, say, security or physical security infrastructure. So I think what you're suggesting is eventually that will also digitize, and so they will also go in a CISO route. As you're from the CISO, you're going to the like Chief Physical Security Officer as well route. Is that
I think right? So. I think you're going to see groups, and I've seen other CISOs in, especially within the Boston area here, becoming established as CSOs and taking on physical security. I know Jim Routh at Aetna, and forgive me, the gentleman's name who oversees ADP. Both of them took on those roles, merged those capabilities, and are overseeing them going forward. But yes, I think that you're going to see that that transition, because you're also going to have an enablement of technology within physical security that's going to allow those guards or representatives to be able to perform at a better, in a higher caliber, because they're going to have more information at their hands, and they're almost going to become analysts, be able to determine what's going on in a space, either based on video camera, data, badge data, and those types of practices. You see the kind of all that pull into more of a central kind of a role, and then have, guards and representatives do that actual physical, watch, working a rotation, or guarding an area or overseeing something, and be able to push them to be able to do more of that. And you see that analytical component shift more into, a traditional SOC or some type of a, internal analyst-driven space.
Interesting. That's awesome, by the way. So now let's talk about your journey from, say, a very sort of regulated, say, government body to, say, enterprise ecosystem. So how is the security infrastructure, or like how is the workaround or the culture differ between the two templates?
So, I mean, within DoD and the military, it's very command and control. It's very mission centric, right? Mission first is everything that you're kind of working towards. There's there's set boundaries within those spaces that you're operating within, but everybody's marching towards the same mission. That's very similar to corporate life. This has been very different for me to adjust to, because I've having lived in one area for quite a long time and kind of honed my skills in that. But it's still very similar, right? So as a business, you have a mission, you have values that you're driving to for a business. It's geared it's for different reasons, right? DoD and the military, it's geared towards national defense. For a corporation, or any company, it's geared towards, whatever that, their service or their product that they're delivering, and and servicing and having those customers, where that clientele is for that company. So you're working kind of for different people, and there's definitely a different structure internally. How to make decisions, how to look for enabling and who you're enabling. Working for a business to enable them through technology, and then making sure that the security practices you put in place are very different than you can within the government. I think, and you have to take different. There's different risks, right? So within a business, if you shut down an appliance or an application because of any type of an incident or an event, whether it be disaster recovery scenario because your data center got knocked out from power, or because it's a security incident, there's dollars associated with that system or whatever being offline for any amount of time. Within the military, you're not looking at that. You're actually dealing with, if the system is offline for a certain amount of time, there might be human life that's impacted because that data or those systems aren't available. So it's completely different in that aspect, but the similarities, are there to still, operate and make both of those effective. So it's been an interesting change. I've enjoyed it. And it's, because I always like challenges. So this is just a new challenge to kind of figure out and navigate.
Interesting. So what are some of the common challenges that you have seen being a CISO or being a CSO, or like if you can shed some light, or as a security analyst or security, like what are some of the common sort of challenges that you have seen?
So I think since coming here and then talking with a lot of my peers in the industry, the biggest challenges I think are determining, what are the right solutions we should be implementing. I think everyone's got a pretty good knack for what the threats are, and predominantly most people understand kind of how critical their organization's ability to perform their business or what data they need to protect. But there's definitely there's a lot of dialogue and just a lot of discussions around what's the right solution. I get a lot. It's hard to weed through because I get a lot of phone calls from vendors that I swear woke up that morning and said, I'm going to sell security. And it's hard to weed through who has the right products, who has the right approach, because I've got a problem that I'm trying to solve for, much like any other CISO. How do I protect this company's data and their access and their people? And you've got to go out into this marketplace to figure out who can do that the best. It's not going to be a solution. What set of solutions am I going to be able to bring in? Which ones of those are going to be able to work together? Which ones of those are going to be the most cost effective for what I'm trying to do? So really, I think that's one of the largest challenges, because you've got to really weed through, the people that are selling something that maybe it's not, or they're selling something that's just not within your budget, or it's not really going to meet, your need. So it's very rarely have I had a vendor come in and say, I have the solution for you. I know exactly what your problem is, and they told it to me. You've really got to do some due diligence to figure out and establish what are your requirements, what are you trying to solve for, and then do the real research and the real homework on figuring out where is that, where is that solution that's out there and how close can I get? And honestly, am I okay with accepting an 80% solution? I think a lot of things get hung up on trying to what we're doing here, right? It just doesn't exist. So what is it that gets me the closest to towards my goal? And maybe that's enough. That just comes down to regular risk management.
Right. Interesting. We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. So I think one thing that I always worry about, or that I always think about, is that security is a constant changing threat, right? So as technology is emerging really fast. So some things are tapped onto, some things are not tapped onto. Then the more unpredictability you have, the more security issues you will probably end up in. And then you have these sort of standardizations, there's a certified information system security professional, like all these certifications that are out there today. How relevant or how impactful are they in sort of ensuring that you have the professional credentials to secure an organization? If you can shed some light on that.
Sure. I think it's a couple different pieces. You have to have experience, number one. I think that's the piece that goes probably farther than anything else. And it's not just experience in information security. I've always said that, information security within any place is really, when you look at it at its core, is just solid architecture and solid engineering. If both of those things were perfected, I wouldn't be here, right? None of my peers would have their job if we had perfect engineering and architecture to anything that we were designing. True. But we don't, so here we are. So looking for experience from people, in those areas, that's the thing that I think really makes very, very good security professionals. I've got a ton of analysts on my teams that were, former DBAs, former systems administrators, and it's because that's what they're defending, right? That's what they're looking to defend. And if you don't understand that technology, how can I expect you to fully defend it? It's been really interesting. I just had an interview earlier today with a younger person who's graduating college very soon. They're looking to get out, and they're going through and looking to get into the workforce, and they want to get into cybersecurity, information security field. And they have some experience, through internships, but their degree is in that. Now we see this emergence of people taking and getting cybersecurity degrees. And I like it, but there's this balance where you're like, you haven't done anything with regards to what you're trying to defend. You just kind of jumped right into it, you know. In my day, and I don't want to sound like I'm too old, but like in my day and the people that I respect who are in this space, they came up through the IT ranks, fully understand what they're trying to defend, and have now been able to just focus in on security. So it's going to be interesting to see how these degrees and how that college education is going to help bolster and now create a new kind of breed of a workforce to start off on doing security and just start from day one and building that experience.
Interesting.
The certifications, and yeah, I have my CISSP and my GICSP. Those are really good. I think, you know, like any certs, learn a subject and test to that subject. They're not as high on my value list when I'm interviewing candidates as experiences. And as I was kind of joking earlier with somebody, you know, the number one question that we like to ask any potential candidate or prospect to our information security program is, tell me about your home lab. You know, if their answer is no, I don't have one, that usually tells us a lot about, you know, how passionate they are about this space. And if they do say they have one and they go into detail and they can tell you all about it, that immediately gives us the, you know, the input. And I don't care how young or how old you are, it tells me about your passion and your want to do this, because this job is all about problem solving. And it's, if you're not really passionate about problem solving, you're probably not a very good problem solver. People who like to be creative and come up with and solve for things and do solutioning and all of that, you know, I kind of equate them to people who like crossword puzzles. You know, you like to think like that, you like to pick up that newspaper and do that crossword puzzle, you truly enjoy it, you'll do it at any time. And it's that type of critical thinking that you're looking for. That's a very, you know, basic example. I'm not trying to equate security professionals to people who like crossword puzzles, but that's the kind of passion and the kind of thinking you're looking for out of somebody. So
I think it's awesome. Thank you so much, by the way, for sharing your thoughts. So on that note, let's talk about who make up for the best entrant in security industry. Like as a like if I want to get into the security industry, what are some of the 1 to 3 advice that you could give me that I could do to be in it?
So I think there's a couple different tracks, right? So you can, I think I kind of break things down. Either you take the governance and policy track, right, which is almost kind of pseudo auditor level role, where you're looking at policies, frameworks, implementing standards. It's very almost paper driven, but obviously we're trying to be as digital as we can, so less paper. But you're really, it's almost, you know, legal, right? That kind of level. You're just dealing with a lot of policies. You're not very technical. You're not doing systems. You're not looking into things. The other track really is the technical track. So you have, you know, analysts who can, you know, open up full packet captures, review PCAP, see what's going on within, you know, a system-to-system communication over a network, fully understanding what that is, possibly even then, you know, evolving from there to, you know, be able to reverse engineer malware and see, you know, what malware is happening. You've also got the track within there of somebody who can do intelligence gathering and understand and start kind of pulling together what an adversary's motive is, what their resource is, basically what's known as their tactics, techniques, and procedures, their TTPs, you know, and starting to figure out, how does the bad guy think? What is he trying to do? You know, what are his motives? Where is he trying to get in? So you have that kind of intelligence component. So there's like that whole side right there is just, it's huge. So first you got to kind of determine which way you want to go. You know, from the technical side, I think that's what a lot of people think cybersecurity is just all about, but they dismiss the governance piece, and it's still very valuable. Within the technical space, you know, getting your experience with the systems that you're looking to defend. You know, do you fully understand how a Windows operating system is set up? You know, the folder structure, the regular permissions. You know, can you do the same thing with Linux? Basically, can you understand what a good system is supposed to look like, so that when you look for and see abnormalities or misconfigurations, they jump out at you, right? Can you look for and see that same type of thing within, you know, a network? Do you have a full understanding of, you know, how Juniper, Palo Alto, or Cisco devices are supposed to be configured? The same type of thing. You know, can you understand a user account or administrative account should or shouldn't be able to do certain things. So fully understanding kind of the underneath the hood component. The security piece really just comes into keeping them within the baseline or within the, within a variance that's tolerated, right? Information security for me is really just finding when things come out of variance, looking for abnormalities, and then being able to hunt for that type of activity either within a system or a network or a set of systems in a network, right? Can you look at a full list of processes that are within 5, 6, and find where there's only 1 or 2 happening across all of them? Like, that should jump out at you as something that's abnormal, right? Because if you have really good configuration management, all those systems should look the same, right?
True.
So if you have one thing that's happening by itself, that should be, maybe it's not a red flag, but it's a yellow flag, and it's something that's worth to investigate. That's having that type of, that kind of mindset and understanding is probably, what you need on top of just base level systems and network understanding. And then, just there's a whole nother track of just, software development and application development, database management, so you can really get into each of these, and it looks very similar to the same track that most IT professionals are taking. You're focused, within information security, you're focused on maintaining the confidentiality and integrity of the systems, right? As well as to a lesser part, the availability of those systems. IT is really geared towards the operational and the execution and the efficiency of those systems. So neither one's right, neither one's wrong. Both sides, both groups need to be involved. It's just each group has their focus and their specialty. And it's great when they can both do that work together, because then you've got somebody who's just thinking about security, somebody who's just thinking about operations. They can work together to make sure that system meets both of the needs.
Interesting. So thank you so much, Brian, on that. So I think let's talk about now one of the hypothetical. So if suppose I am a startup and I want to sort of secure my infrastructure, right? So what are some of the things that you could recommend, maybe a 12-month cycle on sort of what all I should do to secure? And like, I can't afford a CISO and I don't know what that really means. All I know is that I'm vulnerable to threats. So what are some of the things that you could recommend?
So I think, out of the gate, there's some really great standards out there that kind of lay it out as far as risk goes for any size organization that you need to hit kind of out of the gate. And they're the critical security controls. It's a group set. There's known as the CSC, the top 20. Though SANS puts out the top 20 as well. They back that, and they're a well-recognized group. So you want to have a full inventory of all your devices, right? You basically want to know, I can't defend what I don't know exists. So knowing fully where you're working from, where all your systems are, and that could be, if you're a startup with 4 or 5 people and you've got some cloud services, just know where those all are. Know what laptops you're using for work. Know what devices you're using. Secondly, knowing what software you're using, having a full inventory of all the software that you're legitimately using within an organization. So if you start seeing software, being installed or being used that's outside of that should be kind of a tip-off to what's going on. Third is your, basically your vulnerability management. Staying up to date on all of your patches, keeping your systems current, working on supported and vendor-supported software, right? So whether that's open source software or not, just staying current with that. Third, having some basic level of malware protection. Just even though we've moved beyond very quickly kind of what antivirus, most traditional antivirus can do, it's still a commodity protection. It's table stakes. You might as well just not have to deal with those issues by just having it in place and leveraging it. And even if you're a startup and you don't even have the funds for a full-blown solution from some of the larger AV providers, there's cheaper solutions that are out there that are just as good to be able to get you going and protect you. And again, take care of the commodity threats. The fifth one is probably the easiest one to implement and probably the one that's most often overlooked. Having a segregation to your administrative rights within your system or anything that you're operating. It's like something, I think it's, don't quote me on this, but I think the numbers that I've seen are something around 80% of infections and vulnerabilities that are exploited are usually traced back to the misuse of administrative privileges. So, if you got 5 or 6 guys, whatever, guys and girls working on a startup, making sure that the accounts that they use to administer the software that they're building are separate accounts from the ones that they're using to read their email and surf the web. Those are, I lost you. You still there?
Yep, I think your video is off.
So just using those 5 practices are what I would consider the low-hanging fruit.
So, Brian, is your video off? Now it's back. Okay.
It's back.
Okay, now it's back. Sorry. Yep.
So doing those 5 things, those are your top 5. You got to do those because those are the quick wins, right? Those are the things that you can just do right out of the gate. And then from there, really building out and doing anything beyond that, you've got all the information in front of you and available to be able to do bigger and better things as you grow. I mean, quite honestly, say you're a startup with 5 people and you immediately grow to 20, 30, 50 people. If you didn't do start doing inventorying of your systems in the beginning, how are you going to start doing it? It's just going to become a lot harder later on. Now, it can be done, but you might as well start doing good practices early on and carry them through as you scale.
Interesting. So let's talk about and when he was saying that, I think the thing that came to my mind was the Equifax debacle, right? So if you are to sort of considering whatever has happened, what are some of the things that is like if you are asked to sort of man Equifax and sort of fix their security vulnerabilities, what are some of the things that you would suggest?
Well, I think I don't know enough about what security vulnerabilities they have within their organization or what their state of their security program is, but I could tell you that looking at on the surface based on the news that's come out, right, and I'm trying to be careful about my words because I don't want to say that I don't know anything about Equifax beyond what I've read in the news, right? So I'm working off of that information. But looking at what they had been breached through an open source software known as Apache Struts, which was announced to be vulnerable, I think back in March or sometime around that time frame. And it's leveraged by a lot of different organizations as a technology. Apache, that group came out and said, look, this is vulnerable, and here's the patch. So the vendor provided the remediation. Equifax, right or wrong, I mean, obviously I'm a citizen who was part of that breach, like probably just about every other American. Right. So we're all going to look at it as a wrong. Didn't take that opportunity to apply that patch when they could have, because they could have just kept it from being exploited. It was one of the systems that was accessible on the internet and running a vulnerable piece of software. Well, that to me, just on the surface, just speaks to being just poor patch management, right? And probably poor inventory. They probably maybe even didn't know that they had struts running on those front-end web services to then even know that when the vulnerability came out, where to go look inside their environment to say, hey, this vulnerability came out. Does it impact us? Or do we have this software here? Because if you have that inventory up front, you're like, oh, we have that software. It sits over on this web server. That web server does X, Y, and Z. Now we know we have to patch that because it's going to protect everything that's behind there. So that, again, goes back to your inventory, and then your continuous monitoring of your vulnerabilities and having a good, solid vulnerability management practice around it. So
interesting.
Off the cuff, that would probably be the area I would start with. They're dealing with a whole lot more than that, but that would be one programmatic area within that organization that probably needs a good hard look and some resourcing and the proper people behind it to make it effective, so that in 6 months they're not reliving this and there's some new vulnerability that comes out that they didn't know that they were susceptible to, that then becomes exploited, and now here we are again, right? Although
So I think that's a very good point, by the way. And I was wondering that, so how much of your job entails understanding these patches? Because many times the patches itself will have vulnerabilities, and like how much is a role of a security analyst or security officer to understand everything, every piece of code, and how do you balance that juggle between like being running a tech battle of understanding what you're running, all the assets that you're running and the vulnerabilities, and the
Right.
cultural sort of tying those things to like getting the business practices and merging these two. How do you balance those two things?
Sure. I think as a CISO or anybody in a role like I'm in, I'm not charged to really fully understand, the intricate details, technical details of the patches. I do because I used to run, I used to live that world. So
Right.
I luckily understand it. So I know what to expect out of my analysts and the operations teams that deal with it. But, from an analyst standpoint, I think, their job is to understand where different technologies exist. And if you kind of bucketize it, you pretty much break things down. How many different types of web servers are you running? You're running Apache or you're running IIS. It's Windows or Linux shop. You probably have some type of variation within there, maybe from IBM or HP or whoever that's running some kind of version of that. Just knowing where that exists, that alone and having that inventory, that's what you're leaning on, really. So you don't necessarily need to know the intricate details. You just need to know where do these things exist. So if you can kind of chop them up and break up where things are, bucketize them, it's a lot easier to manage. So you're not wondering about that web server's running all these different things and having to remember all of that. You just need to know, where's my Apache web farm? Okay, we're at this version on all of them. Okay, good to know. Because if we see something come out against that, I know that there's 20 systems that I need to address that with.
Interesting. And tell me about the technological battle. So basically now you have enterprise software, then now you have open source emerging, then there's some companies acquire other companies, they come with their own sort of ecosystem, and now you're merging the two together.
Right.
As a CISO or as a CSO, how do you sort of keep yourself at pace with all the integrational nightmares? Like I think you put up very beautifully that create a bucket list of tech and sort of create an inventory list of what the hell is going on, and from there on try to understand that. But what are some of the cheat sheets, some of the hacks that you could suggest that someone could sort of how do you cope up with the technological evolution and integration nightmares?
I think, I haven't had a ton of new company integration, so we haven't gone through that in the 2 years that I've been here, but I've definitely previously just seen, bringing in new operations. And I think the best part is kind of keeping them at bay until you fully understand everything that they have by themselves before you look to integrate. I know I look to have a full compromise assessment done on an organization or a system that I'm inheriting. So I want to know that I'm going to inherit it clean, right? And having a group, either you contract out to another party or an organization, or you have the skill set in-house to be able to do that. But being able to look at a system or a network or an organization and be able to figure out, have you already been compromised? How vulnerable are you? What's the total true cost to bring you up to whatever, my standard is or whatever the organization's standard is first, and actually kind of figuring that in. It's interesting when you see, M&A activity taking that path, right? Like look what happened with Yahoo. I'm sorry, was it Yahoo or recently where they were acquired by, I'm totally forgetting out who it was. Verizon.
Yeah,
Verizon, right? And it came out after the announcement that they had been breached, right? Well, what if Verizon knew that they were breached prior to that announcement? That might have changed what the cost was that Verizon was willing to pay, right? They might have wanted to go ahead and figure in whatever the cleanup costs were to the purchase price, right? So having that understanding is really good because you can kind of bake that in to what you're going to be doing. And I think that's a prime example of at large scale, right? Where that would have been ideal. But yeah, so I think, culturally, security and ops are, trying to work hand in hand. But again, kind of like I said earlier, we're set out with different agendas initially, or at least focuses on what we're trying to accomplish, right? We're paid to sit here and think about the security of the organization. Operations teams are paid to think about the efficiency and the operations of it. The businesses are paid to think about how do I grow the business, and I need IT to help support me, right? So I'm a supporting arm to the supporting arm that's enabling the business, right? And that's for organizations that don't have security practices, that's a huge hurdle to get over. So you need to really, weave it into how we're doing things or how you're going to do things, and not really hammer it that it's a must do. And you really need to treat and create partnerships and not be seen as a roadblock. I changed and I created the strategy for our security team here to do two things. You have to, everything that we're doing has got to follow this mantra of enable the business and minimize asset loss, right? Because without the business, I'm not going to be here. And my job is to minimize, not negate, but minimize the impact of any security related incidents or events to that part of the business or to the business as a whole. So taking that approach is it. And again, enabling the business is that first part. If they didn't exist, I wouldn't be here. I need them just as much as they need me.
Interesting. And I think and one piece that we find ourselves many times into this conversation of, hey, security is a nagging group, right? They're pretty much like my lawyers, right? Hey, just don't do this, don't do that. They have like 10,000 things of what not to do. But to run a business, I have to just jump on the first opportunity that I get, and it is random. And like security hates randomness, right? That's where the unpredictability come, and that's what, right? So how do you cope up with that? And I think you put it beautifully that like enabling businesses is number one priority. Does that mean negating security? I think in many aspects, like how do you balance that hey, business want to be innovative, but you don't want them to be too innovative that it compromises some things?
Yeah, it is a fine balance. I don't like to be the shop of no. I like to be the shop of how. If we can build security into what we're doing first and foremost, then it enables them to do it later on, and I don't have to think about it, right? We built it securely the way it was supposed to be. Now go ahead and take that and go off and be innovative, right? I want you to be mobile. I want you using cloud applications. I want you to be able to freely share your data, but I also want to know that data is only going to the people that you intended, right? The people that are accessing our information are those that are authorized. So if you can. I joked earlier today, and somebody else I'm stealing it from, but if you can't afford to secure a system or an application, you can't afford the system or application. So you really need to work with the businesses just up front to create the ability and the platform to be innovative and to go off from there. It's when that wasn't thought of and that security is bolted on after the fact or thought of after the fact or seen as a gate later on, that's where it's seen as a real issue. That's when businesses or any business people are seeing it as a roadblock.
Interesting.
The example you give with the lawyer, right? If I sat with my lawyer up front before I went into something and he explained everything that I needed to know, I would go into a conversation or whatever that next event would be, knowing full well legal advice.
Right.
But if I went through the event first and then contacted a lawyer, I would have roadblocks, right? So you have to treat it like that. Now, conversely, some things you just have to accept, and that just comes down to good risk management practices. I've never said, hey, we need to remove all vulnerabilities. We need to, negate all risk. It can't work like that. Like business, you have to accept risk in order to get a reward. And security has to follow suit. There are some risks you can just take. Maybe because you have some type of compensating control in place. Maybe because you have some type of mitigating factor that you've enabled that hasn't necessarily removed the risk completely, but it's reduced it to a low enough point that it's within you or your company's risk appetite. And that's an approach that I think a lot of people don't either see or take, is that it's not black and white. It's a scale, right? That you can operate within. And it just comes down to, what's the risk appetite of the organization? Are they willing to accept it? And if they're willing to accept a risk, there shouldn't be an issue.
Interesting. No, I think you raise a very, very interesting point. And I think I was talking to a bunch of security professionals, I think about a couple of months back. And we're talking about how much of security is a financial engineering problem, right? So sure, like there would be like 10,000 things that I should not do to be secure, but there's just one pain in the neck thing for my security folks that I should do to get me some more business. and many businesses are like that. And I think one of the thing that I quote is about the T-Mobile CEO saying that there are two type of businesses: one who are hacked and one who don't know yet, right? So
Right.
if you put that math into equation, like how much further are we from calling it a financial engineering problem and just settling it, or like or really we have to just keep running the battle on sort of finding an issues and then fixing it or something? If you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, I'd ideally like to get away from, security as being professional, janitors. That would be nice, like just constantly cleaning up and being proactive. I think if you change it and don't look at it being a janitor, but look at it more just being, doing forensics constantly, because we're always working post. It's always things are happening after the fact. There's very real time security, capabilities that you're able to enact as a group, right? You can script and implement technologies that will real time block, but you're expecting and already paying for those systems to do that, right? I expect that system to block and stop and protect. It's going to do that. It's going to do it automatically. It's the areas where the security programs really are and sit with analysts and people is the blocking didn't do it. Now we're detecting and responding to activities, and that's always happening after the fact. Yeah, I think that's the hardest part, is just getting that down to the shortest amount of dwell time, and keeping it so that you can see the areas where you're constantly kind of fighting and constantly cleaning up, and then moving those activities after you've done them into some type of, automatic or repetitive, almost, leveraging robotics type of way, so that you can then truly do, true analysis on other things. So as your tier 2 and tier 3 personnel are working on repetitive tasks, you automate them in a fashion so that you can shift them into your tier 1, and it's cheaper to do them on tier 1. It's just more efficient. So I don't know if there's going to be a point where we just all get out from underneath constantly cleaning up or chasing it. But there's definitely ways at least to lessen the impact on your organization.
Interesting. And as a CISO, like how do you prioritize which vulnerability to go after first, or like how do you, like what are some of like how do you prioritize a risk? If you can shed some lights on that.
I think I look at it in a couple different ways. I leverage the CVSS scores, out of the national groups to kind of give me the first kind of swag at, like, okay, is this a critical? Is this a high type of or medium vulnerability? And then from there, that gives me kind of a starting point. But one organization's critical is not another organization's, right? So you have to then take into account what compensating controls do I have in place that might lessen that and not be as critical of a vulnerability and might be less. And then you have to figure out what's the exposure of that system that is vulnerable. Is it publicly accessible? Is it so deep within my organization that, it's not accessible, by very many people or very many avenues? That might lessen the risk. Also, too, you got to couple in, is it exploitable, right? Are there publicly known exploits out there against whatever it is that is vulnerable? Now, not all exploits are publicly known, but if they are, that at least should tip you off to what you should be working on first. And then last is just the overall kind of structure of your organization, right? And the other protections that you have in place that could allow for some type of compensating control to be leveraged. So you really have to take in kind of all of those, and that really leaves you with what your risk is. I think the last component, after you kind of take all of those technical sheer security perspective, is what is it that you're protecting? What is it that vulnerability is on? Is that on a critical server with critical data and PII, or is that on a file server that holds zip code information, right? So I'm going to protect one much differently than I am the other, right? So a critical vulnerability on the zip code server is not as important as as one that's maybe containing some level of PII or PHI.
Interesting. Now let's talk about a bunch of KPIs that you care about as a chief security officer. Like, what are some of the KPIs that you think that you say, okay, makes up for a good, like, I'm doing my job, like if I monitor those KPIs?
Sure. I think it kind of across the board is one of the first things, and back to the policy side is, of the standards that we've put in place within an organization, how many of them have exceptions against that, right? Are we, are the policies that we have, is the policy basically within an organization just ruled by exception, which basically tells me that probably the standards we put in place are too stringent and they're not working anyway. So maybe we reduce them to a point where they are just effective enough where they need to be, and you're not ruling by exception all the time. So I like to look at that as one area. See, like, are we being just too forceful, right? Let's make something that's meaningful and actually attainable, and that's okay. That it coincides with the company's risk appetite, right? I think secondarily, just vulnerability information and metrics across, an internal as well as an external view of your systems and your organization. How does the world see you, right? Which is basically how do attackers see you, as well as internally, how do you look, right? And using that information and seeing that, those metrics are really meaningful. And then from there, you can kind of track, are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Is our patch methodology effective? Are we bringing on new systems that aren't secure, and then we're realizing that they're insecure, and then we're going back through, some type of reconfiguration to secure them, so you can kind of track that. Also, too, just the number of incidents, looking at your external number of events that you're dealing with, and then as you kind of go through your security layers, how many actually trickle down to become incidents that you need to investigate? Are you investigating hundreds of thousands of things, a month or whatever? And that makes you realize, well, are our outer perimeter capabilities effective enough? That might tell you no. For an enormous organization, that might be normal. For a smaller organization, that would probably be really bad, and you might not need to relook at what are my first layer of defense protections. So looking at the events that are coming in, that's very insightful. Also, too, what types of events, right? Are we consistently seeing the same type of events and incidents happening? And if so, where can we fix maybe one or two things so we don't see those, right? We're basically seeing repeat attacks. It's like, okay, well, they keep coming in this way, they keep attacking this one way, and they're successful. Well, let's fix that one thing, and then we shouldn't see this anymore. So looking for those types of trends and those types of patterns, that helps you figure out where you need to go back to your protections and bolster them. So those are a lot of the metrics that I look at just kind of off the cuff. There's a deep level underneath all of those, and I think you can really get into some of them and almost get lost. But I think at the top, those ones are the ones that can give you a good understanding of maybe the security posture of your organization.
Interesting. Now I think one thing also I want to discuss with you is role of government, right? So role of regulation.
Yep.
How are they doing when it comes to sort of keeping an organization secure? Do you think there's a role of government in sort of in helping regulate some of these things or some of the standards, or
sure,
if you can shed some light?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at regulation the wrong way. Obviously you don't want to be over-regulated, but the role there is, I believe, is really good. It gives you a backstop, right, to be able to lean on and say, look, I have somebody else who says we should be doing this too, right? I'm a firm believer in NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, their cybersecurity framework, which was put into place underneath then President Obama in February of 2014. It has 98 controls across 5 families: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. That makes it really straightforward with how to look at an organization and set it up for security success. And it gives you some metrics off the bat on what to do. Those standards developed by NIST, I mean, they're amazing. They're on par there with what ISO has out there. I mean, there's a ton of different standards. I just personally believe in that one because I've seen it be very successful both inside the government and outside the government. But yeah, those types of standards are well needed. If you look and pivot over to the utility space, the energy space, nuclear power, anybody who falls underneath NERC SIP, which is another regulatory, giving those groups more power to be able to enforce those. I mean, personally, as just a citizen, within, my town, I want to know that the people and the organizations that deliver my water and my power have a really good cybersecurity posture. And to date, it's really dependent on that organization's want and desire and ability to do it. And without regulation, if they're not forced to, that might not be where they spend their next IT dollar on security. They might spend it on something else. Well, as a citizen who wants to make sure that I'm getting electricity and water delivered to my house for myself and my family, I want to know that it's going to be actually delivered and available. If it goes to like the whole blackout thing that happened within the U.S. and just regulation around the power companies and all of that for cybersecurity is something that definitely should be invested in, because I don't want to go through that again. I don't think anybody wants to go through that again. So forcing them to look at that as an issue and addressing it, I think is a proper role and a proper thing for the government to be involved with.
Interesting. And thank you for shedding light on that. Definitely. So now let's talk about your personal side. So let's talk about some of the things that really helped you be what you are today. Like some of one to three keys of success that you think anyone who's aspiring to become a good CSO or CISO, there's some of the tenets that you would pass on.
I think I spoke earlier about the one question I like to ask interview is having a home lab. If you want to geek out and do that, I think that's really good to be involved with. Outside of work, being able to challenge yourself. I personally just like to be challenged, mentally and physically. I'm competitive, so I really like to work on just myself, myself as a person, and so I think keeping a balance and knowing when to step out of this job and when to step out of the office and go live your life, and having a good balance so that when you come back into it, because there's a lot of very stressful days, a lot of really stressful moments dealing with security, that you can be fully into it, and being able to break away and be able to recoup and just reinvigorate yourself helps you do your job a lot better. So I always tell people, just after the hard days that we have, or just other days, it's like, just make sure you take that vacation. If you planned on being off that day, take that day off. Like, that was going to be important to you. Like, it's important that you take care of yourself. So doing that's really good. I think being physically active is something as well. I mean, not everybody's into it, but I personally find a lot of value in being physically active. I do a lot of bike riding. I try to go hiking when I can, but I used to do and race a lot of triathlons. So that kept me, I felt really well-rounded, and allowed me to kind of exercise off a lot of maybe frustrations or whatever with a job, like any job. And be able to come back into work feeling pretty good about, myself and what I wanted to do. And that was really great. And then also too, just, investing. I have, a beautiful wife and daughter, so I get to, invest a lot of time with them and their school and what they're working on and what their interests are. So being able to just detach, I think, from work is probably one of the best things I can do for work.
Interesting. Oh, I think that's well put, and I think this is like most of the interesting professionals that we talk to and who are very successful. One of the common tenet that we saw was that the ability to detach and attach. So I think that's and you're putting a emphasis on that as well. So I think that's much appreciated. So Brian, I think thank you so much for staying so late and having a conversation with our community. It's a ball, I think. And before we part ways, definitely need to have your closing remark for our audience. And I think if you can, if you have one.
I think. Wow, that's tough. It really is. How to sum it all up, but for the audience, I think they have. Look, you got to look at things differently. If you're going to go into any situation, don't get so focused that don't get lost in what you believe the outcome is going to be. Don't be afraid to chase different types of solutions. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. A lot of what we do within this space, a lot of what I've done through my career is trial and error, and it's paid off. And don't be afraid of trying out something else. And I think for any of the aspiring CISOs or the aspiring security analysts and that space out there, definitely looking at shifting and looking at how you think about problems and how you address issues, and starting to adapt to leveraging data, leveraging analytics, leveraging other new tools and other new different ideas, and breaking away from the way that's always been done, because the threat landscape is going to constantly keep changing, and the only way to adapt and be able to battle on that landscape is to be able to adapt and change with it and try out other different things. So just if this is the field for you, just keep an open mind and keep at it.
Beautiful. And with that, thank you so much, Brian. One thing I forgot to ask, and I definitely want to ask, is your favorite read. Do you read any book? Like what do you recommend?
So non-IT book, but it's written by Jack Kerouac. It's his book On the Road. I got turned on to that book in high school by a teacher who during a book report basically just said, hey, everybody's got to pick a book, whatever. And I had no idea what I wanted to pick out of that list. As your traditional high school, list of books to read. And she told me, she's like, Brian, I think you'll really like On the Road. I must have read that book 5 times before I actually had to, finish the assignment. I loved it. And I think it changed my life, because I actually, I picked up and did a lot of traveling after I read that book. And I think it was great. It was a great read. So yeah, I think On the Road by Jack Kerouac is definitely my favorite book.
That's awesome. And with that, thank you again, Brian. Thank you so much again. And we are always welcome on the podcast. And thank you so much for candidly sharing the CISO's perspective with our audience. And I think we will have a ball. And thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on a